Okay, I'll be transparent. I was envisioning something like smaller, on the floor. We're all more intimate and stuff, and having more conversation. I do want to do something to start, actually, and everyone seems to be somewhat close to some other people. So I actually want y'all to talk amongst yourselves for a few minutes here. And actually, we're going to go back to the question that we asked this morning, or a similar question that we had this morning in terms of the vision that we have for our families, but for our kids in particular. So I know there are like kids here, so y'all can talk about this question as well. But especially for adults that maybe are going to be having kids, or have kids now, or grandparents, talk about this question amongst yourselves. Your kid, your grandkid, is 25, so imagine that. Imagine that they're 25 years old. What do you want? I do not like this phrase, right? People say, like, my relationship with food. And I think you don't have a relationship with food. It's something you eat. So I don't love the phrase relationship with technology, but I think you understand what I mean by that, okay? Your kid is 25 years old, and I want you to think about, or discuss this question. What do you want their relationship with technology to look like? And as we said this morning, be specific about the nots and the do's and the don'ts, the negative and the positive. What do you want your kid, when they're an adult, they're on their own, assuming they're on their own at 25, what do you want their relationship with technology to look like? And discuss that question with the people sitting around you for maybe 2 minutes, 2 or 3 minutes. No, I want to listen in.
The key phrase has been used as optional.
All right, what do you guys think? Okay, let's bring it back if that's possible. And I will tell you that the suggestion I heard from the front row was that by 25, you've already inserted a chip into their back. That was what it was said. So you're like constantly tracking them. That, there's no way of escaping your watchful eye at 25. Feel free to yell out. Maybe that'll keep comments short. If you have to yell out, just kind of snippets briefly. What are some of the things that y'all said in your groups vision for your kids or grandkids' relationship with technology once they're an independent adult. A tool, not a master. Thank you, Edwin. Not a substitute for real relationships. Thank you, Mark.
How would you feel if the relationship they have at 25 say that you have the technology now?
Ooh, that's a hard question, right? Yeah, do you want it to be the way your relationship is with technology now? Do you want theirs to be the same or better, right? Anything else you want to yell out what you talked about? Do good with it, was said. Okay. And again, I mean, I've already kind of the punchline of this activity has already been made in the sermon this morning. I mean, really, all the things we're talking about here comes down to character, right? That is our vision for our kids and our grandkids, is that we would be people of character, of self-discipline, self-control in particular. But I do think it is important to think about, again, a specific vision of what we want them to be doing with their technology and media when they're an adult, and then you start working backwards, right, to think, well, how am I going to get them there? What kind of things do they need to learn now? What kind of practices do I want to establish now? And I gave the kind of two examples this morning in my kind of snarky comment about learning financial independence or learning, food independence. But it'd be the same sort of thing, right? Like you have a specific vision about your kid and their financial their ability to handle their finances when they're an adult. And so I'm sure many of you are kind of on a track with your kids, teaching them kind of these fundamental things about how to use money, how the economy works, right? How savings work and all that kind of stuff. You're not handing the credit card over, but you've kind of got them on this pathway of learning these skills because you have a vision in mind of how you want them to use these things when they're an adult. And the same thing, I think, should be true of technology. So I want to give us some time here to talk about then the two types of limits, the boundaries. Again, we've got them on this tight pathway. It's restricted. There's limits. There's boundaries. And they're on this pathway towards independence. And so we talked this morning about limits of time and limits of place. I'm trying to think the best way to do this. Let's maybe take like 6 minutes, and I want us to share with each other maybe things that you're doing at home, maybe things you've seen other people do, or ideas that you've heard. So you don't have to be implementing these things necessarily. If you are, you can share that experience. But let's start with time, the limits of time. Think about the helpful ways in which you could or are setting limits of time on yourself, sure, but also just in your home. We're kind of gearing this session a little bit more towards the home and the family. And then I'll tell you when to switch, and then we can be talking about limits of place or space boundaries. So talk for a few minutes about specific practical ideas, ways to implement limits of time on technology and media in the home. Go. I don't know if I'm on or not. Let's switch it. So if you've been talking about limits of time, time limits, if you've been talking about that, switch over now. Talk for a few minutes about limiting space. How can you put space boundaries in your life to kind of put technology where it needs to go? Okay, let's bring it back, and I will again ask for some shout out answers. But again, I part of the reason I wanted to do this is because to me it's a way of kind of keeping my promise. I told you on Friday night that part of our goal this weekend is to start a conversation. So I wanted to literally use some of this time tonight to converse with each other, and then to kind of get the wheels in motion, because this is precise. What you've been doing for the last few minutes is precisely the thing that needs to be happening on an ongoing basis, right? Parents, families, kids talking amongst each other and saying, hey, how are we doing with this? What are some ideas, right? I'm kind of stuck on this one problem. You have any, problem-solving tips for this one thing I'm dealing with in my home? And to share ideas. I don't always have very great ideas, right? But if you talk to a few friends, you get some good ideas, and you can help each other with that sharing of resources and tools and information. We maybe do a little bit more of that before we quit tonight. It is 5:40, right? Dave was just giving me a hard time. 5:40 when we're quitting?
40 is the first bell, 45 is the second.
Okay. I was in the bathroom this morning when the announcement was made about class, so I didn't know. That's helpful to know. That's good to know. So, let's start with time. So, y'all were talking about time limits. What did you hear from somebody that you thought was a good idea? Okay, I'll give you one. Melissa over here. Melissa mentioned the scripture before screens idea, like the Bible reading before. You see, that's a version of time limit. It's not a time on the clock, but it's chronological order, right? Or it's an ordering of things. That being whatever time it is, you wake up, or when the day starts, there is a order of things, and it's scripture before screens. That's an example of it. Other ideas that you heard? Only on the weekends. Thank you. Thank you. I like that. Other things?
30-minute app limits on phones.
Sure. And you know, Peter probably knows this, your phone, more and more, this is one of the kind of interesting things, even since I first gave in some of these lessons several years ago, even in the last few years, phones are offering more options in the phone to restrict yourself and restrict your usage of certain apps. And you can set on your phone time limits. Now, sometimes those limits and restrictions are pretty soft, like you just hit like ignore, and you can keep on going doing what you're doing. And so you may need to find something that's a little bit harder or stricter, or set a passcode that your spouse has the code to, or a friend or something. But again, master the technology and find those tools and ways. Ask somebody, if you don't know, how to find ways on your browser or on your phone to set a time limit for 30 minutes only each day on whatever app you choose, or 10 minutes a day, right, or something. Okay. Other kind of ideas about time limits. Maybe one more. Okay, that was Jade, I think. Thank you, Jade. Yeah, the kind of, again, prioritizing and ordering. So homework before screens is an example of that same principle as well. What about space? This is a more interesting one to me. What about space? Boundaries of space. No screens in the bedroom? Okay, thank you. Get a box. And what's the box for? We were talking about the box earlier. Keeping your phones away from your children. That's right, yeah. That's No. The box is cool. The box has, and I forget what it's called, but you can pay a bunch of money and pay a subscription each month for a box that you put your phone in. It's actually a charger, and it tracks. So if you're into the competitive, and maybe as a family, that actually might work, right? It keeps track of how many hours a day your phone is in the box. And so your kids can compete and say, hey, my phone was in the box for, 13 hours today. What about you? But it kind of reverses the whole thing on them, right? And for us, we see that. Who was it that was telling me about the, work computer or whatever apps keeping track of how many hours you've used that app? And it's always depressing when you see how many hours you've spent on it. So you're reversing that around, and you're able to accumulate over weeks and months how many hours your phone has been in the box. So you can do other things. Maybe another space or place boundary idea?
In our group, someone has to have their phone all the time, just given the nature of their job.
You can say it's you, Todd. It's okay. It's
It was Becky Call.
Wow, okay.
So, I have to have with her all the time, but her Apple Watch allows her to see if a message really needs her to actually take her phone out. So she's at someone's house, she doesn't have to keep her phone out, because that's what we discussed. When you're a guest at someone's home, you don't really have your phone in your hand. You're a guest in your home, and you need to give your attention to them back and forth. Because that lets her know whether she needs to step out from that community or not, because she actually bought a second device. So
Yeah.
actually, she uses it well.
Well, that was, see, that was what we were talking about the other night, right? Mama B, like, that was Todd doing this. Just keep digging. So I like that, and it relates to something else that I will mention to you, because what you see in that comment about having, an Apple Watch, which obviously can have its downsides, okay? But the example here is that the Apple Watch has some things about it that actually can free you from your phone to some degree, and that can be a benefit. And so you're getting smart with the devices and what's on which device. I'll give you another example. I think it's another example of the same sort of principle, and I think falls in this category of space. Again, everybody's situation is different, okay? And so I'm sure there are some of you in this room, and it's probably the case that there are some, probably very few, I think, if you take what I'm saying literally, that because of your work, when an email comes into your email inbox, you have to read it immediately, and you have to respond immediately to the email, right? And that's your work is dependent on that sort of thing. Maybe some of you fall in that category. I'm going to go out on a limb and say the vast majority of us, that is not the case. Email can wait. If they need something, they will call, right? Or maybe they'll text, right? But email is like, the rule I was given was, answer within the day or something, okay? Or 24 hours or something. But there's a delay there, okay? So what I did was I took email off of my phone. You can do that. Did you know that? You can actually take apps off of your phone, including something that seems so fundamental or basic as email. So I don't get email to my phone, so it doesn't ding. I don't see it, because that's just another reason to take out the phone and look at it and, distract yourself, do whatever. Instead, email becomes, okay, when I'm in the office, so you see what I've done, I've kind of moved email to a geographical space, which is in my office. And I'll tell you there's some time stuff you can do with that too. I got it from have not been doing it regularly, but there's a book called Deep Work in which he talks about scheduling your email checking. Okay, so like they used to do, I guess, like the news and traffic, right, on the 9s. Okay, so maybe every 2 hours you have scheduled, I'll get on for 10 minutes and check email, even less if there's nothing important, okay? But you've scheduled that for yourself, so email doesn't become one of these things that's always buzzing and reaching for your attention, okay? So that's another, I think, example of that same thing. You're choosing the device that you're going to use each kind of thing for, which device things go to free yourself from that. Yes, Connie?
One thing I learned very early on is that you can turn off notifications.
Right.
Like, you don't have to have notifications for everything that comes, like if you have a game on your phone. You don't have to look at those notifications.
Yes. Thank you, Connie. You can turn off notifications on your phone, go to the settings notification, go down through and just, uncheck everything. And I've noticed more and more people, when I text them, it tells me they're on like a do not disturb kind of thing. I'm always glad to see that, right? That more and more people are going to do not disturb. But again, these are the conversations that I think we should be having. And again, on the resource list, books like The TechWise Family. This is the Fannon's copy. I left mine at home. But these are other books, and just those conversations that further reading will give us, I think, better ideas on how we can set those boundaries, again, for the ultimate purpose of shaping the character of our own selves, shaping our own hearts and minds, and then, of course, shaping the lives and the hearts and minds of our children and building character in them. Okay, I want to do a little interlude here and go to Jeremiah 35. Jeremiah 35. And we are going to read a few verses, but maybe just mark this chapter, come back to it, read it, and kind of meditate on some of its implications. But Jeremiah 35 tells the story of the Rechabites. And I think the story of the Rechabites is a cool example of this principle that we've identified today of casting a vision for your family and then setting commitments, right, for your family based on your vision of the identity of your family and what you want your family to be. So in Jeremiah 35, as kind of a parable in action, the prophets, were often asked to do that by God. God asked Jeremiah to go to the Rechabites, okay, the sons of Jonadab, and to ask them, kind of setting up Jeremiah, right? Ask them to sit down with you and drink wine. And so he goes to them, and he's going to ask them to drink wine with him. And this is their response in Jeremiah 35 in verse 6. But they, the Rechabites, answered, "We will not drink wine," or "we will drink no wine, for Jonadab, the son of Rechab, our father." And that's like our father in kind of a generational sense. This is like a patriarch. Jonadab, son of Rechab, our father, commanded us, quote, "You shall not drink wine, neither you nor your sons forever. You shall not build a house. You shall not sow seed. You shall not plant or have a vineyard, but you shall live in tents all of your days, that you may live many days in the land where you sojourn." That's what Jonadab had said in generations past. And so they say, "We have obeyed the voice of Jonadab, the son of Rechab, our father, in all that he commanded us to drink no wine all our days, ourselves, our wives, our sons, or our daughters, not to build houses to dwell in. We have no vineyard or field or seed, but we have lived in tents and have obeyed and done all that Jonadab, our father, commanded us." Again, a lot that could be said about this story. And ultimately, this is an example. Again, it's a parable in action for Jeremiah. God to tell Jeremiah, I wish the Israelites would obey my commands the way that the Rechabites are obeying the commands of their forefather. That's kind of the point. But I think this is just kind of a really cool and a really, I think, empowering story as we think about casting a vision for our family. You could do the kind of history on who the Rechabites were, and they seem to be related to the Kenites, who you remember were kind of Jethro's father, that kind of family, that line. So not quite Israel, sorry, I said Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, Jethro. I'm going too fast here. Moses' father-in-law. So not quite Israelites, but they kind of lived alongside the Israelites in the land. But because they were not quite Israelites, they had this thing. They lived in tents. Actually, there's a famous Kenite in the book of Judges, Jael, she's living in a tent. She's good with a tent peg and a hammer, and she uses it to nail Sisera to the ground on that occasion, right? So they're kind of living alongside the Israelites, living in tents, and that's kind of who they are, right, as a people. But what I want to point out, a couple things I want to point out about this story is that their commitment as a family, what Jonadab had told them, do not drink wine, do not plant seed, do not have a vineyard, do not own houses, do not dwell in tents. These are not commands of God, are they? God had not commanded them, don't drink wine, don't build houses, don't plant seed, don't live in, or you have to live in tents. Instead, this was, you could say, I think, the vision that Jonadab had for his family. This is who we are. We are the Rechabites, right? And this is the commitment that we're going to make. And he, as a patriarch, established that commitment and put those stakes in the ground, so to speak. And his family honored that generation after generation. And they obeyed those commands, not because they were the commands of God, but because they were the commands and the commitments of their family and their family heritage. And I want us to be thinking about our families in that same way. And especially men, us as men, husbands and fathers. Again, to be asking and answering this question, what is my family going to be like? What kind of family are we going to be? As a husband, as a father, that's up to me to decide that. And then to put that plan into motion. And with that vision to say, you know what, we're not going to do this and this and this. Oh, because God said you can't have this or you can't do this or you have to do this. No. That's who we are as a family, right? And even activities like writing together a family mission statement, I think can be really powerful in this regard. Especially you incorporate the whole family, get the kids involved, and write down a mission statement. This is who we are. Post that on the walls, okay? That becomes your identity. And with that identity established, you draw lines and you put stakes in the ground. You say, we just don't do this as a family. Or this is the way we do things as a family. Whatever those commitments are. And again, not because they are, well, thus saith the Lord, but because this reflects our identity and who we are as a family. And again, I charge men in particular to think seriously about that and take responsibility for your garden that God has made you a steward of. Amen? Okay, we have apparently 14 minutes now left. Let's talk about this road to independence. I mentioned that in the sermon this morning, right? That there's this Hebrews 12 principle of the discipline that in the moment seems painful, okay? But ultimately yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness, okay, in our children. And so we restrict and we discipline them now. By the way, I should have maybe said this in the sermon. I hope when you hear that language of Hebrews 12, the Hebrew writer does not mean discipline in the way that we sometimes mean it, like the spanking as the punishment for the wrongdoing, but discipline in terms of like what an athlete does, right? Restricting yourself, okay? And kind of, tightening up and saying, we're going to, not do these things. We're going to just do this, even if that's hard, okay? The discipline that we offer, in that sense, the training that we offer to our children yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness, and we want them to have that peaceful fruit of righteousness because they're going to be on their own. As we said earlier, we want them to be freed from their devices, right, when they're an adult, be able to use them but not be mastered by them. And so let's talk some about this road to independence, okay? I'll give you a couple examples from the resources that I've drawn from, okay? There's a lady named Dr. Kimberly Young she's actually since passed away, but she was really the first person to do serious research and then ultimately write a book on screen addiction. Okay, and she did a lot of stuff, in some ways mostly with things like video games, especially very immersive video games that people were getting sucked into, addicted to, and then blowing their life savings and ruining their family because of their addiction to the game that they couldn't get away from. Things like that. But screen addiction, she was one of the first people, if not the first, to really identify that and study it, and then she wrote a book on it. And you can find a TED Talk of hers, of course, and some other articles that talk about her or where she gives her recommendations. But I'm not like this. I'm offering you this as an example, okay? One kind of sample here. But for her, in terms of screens, her progression is from 0 to 3, age 0 to 3, never, nowhere in terms of screens. Never, nowhere, up to 3 years old. From 3 to 6, 1 hour a day. Time limit for developmental purposes. Okay, you think of kind of preschool, kindergarten kind of thing. Developmental purposes, 1 hour a day with a screen. Ages 6 to 9, 2 hours a day, used primarily for family bonding. So if you can imagine like maybe a family movie or an active video game that you can play together or something. Okay, 6 to 9, 2 hours a day for family bonding. Ages 9 to 12, 2 hours a day, and you introduce the internet as a very kind of like instructive kind of hold their hand as you introduce the concept of the internet and teach them how to use that from ages 9 to 12, still 2 hours a day limit. And then it says from 12 to 18, she says monitoring and instruction, so the time limits kind of go away. But again, you're with them through the whole thing. You're monitoring everything you're doing, and you're kind of coaching them and teaching them how to use it. Okay. Again, I'm not endorsing that. Okay, and I would have my own comments about the particular time allotments that she gives in each of those categories. But you see the idea, right? And again, she is not a Christian woman talking about this from a biblical perspective. This is just someone who studied the issue and has seen the dangers of screen addiction and is saying, hey, they need to start at nothing for the first few years, and then you slowly and you gradually introduce them to it as you are coaching them and training them and using it for valuable things. Okay. Now, in the TechWise family book, Andy Crouch, their rule was no screens before double digits, as in age 10. Okay. And you can read it. I encourage you to read it. He's not saying, every time they walked into a restaurant, you put a blindfold on the kids so they couldn't see the sports game on in the corner. Okay. But it's, in terms of regular use and regular activity, they're not going to have screens and be using screens. And he even says, this is what they said, we have not followed this yet, but they just didn't have a TV in the house, or at least in the main room of the house, until their youngest kid turned 10 years old. So they stuck pretty faithfully to that commitment. Okay. So these are examples, okay, that I'm offering you, and trying to get you to think about the way that we start from nothing, okay, and then slowly as they get older, allow them to use things, okay, and to increase the amount of usage and the amount of freedom and independence as they get older, really only when they demonstrate trustworthiness to be able to make that next step. Okay, so these are not arbitrary limits like, oh, well, you turn 12, here you go. It's can the child demonstrate the trustworthiness, the responsibility, and if they can't, you take a step back, okay? But you're slowly introducing, more and more things. I may give you unfortunately I'm not going to give you time to talk about it, but I want you to have these kind of conversations, again, share tools and resources, because there are things out there that are being created. Again, this is another one of the benefits of time passing and people seeing the problem get worse and worse. Because as the problem gets worse and worse, there are people that are standing up and saying, wait a second, this isn't good, something needs to be done about this, and they are inventing technologies, or they are creating tools that can then be used to help us in the fight against these things. So one example comes to mind. I don't have a brand name for you, whatever. Again, you're smart people. You can find this kind of stuff. But one of the things you'll hear is that at a certain age, whatever age that is, people have their own opinions, okay? Well, I want my kid to be able to contact me. I want to be able to know where they are, okay? And, I want them to be able to call me, contact me, or vice versa as a safety issue, right? So iPhone 14, here you go. So, but there's a lot of other options that you can use for your kid at whatever age. Like I have heard of a watch that has a GPS in it, right? So wherever they are, you know where they are, you can track them. And into the watch, you can program, half a dozen phone numbers they can call from that device if they need to get a hold of you, whatever. Again, I can't give you all the details of stuff like that because these things are always changing, and you can find them on your own. And many of you likely already know about this kind of stuff and can share the information one with another. But to me, that's a good example of you're moving your kid up the stairway, so to speak, or up the line towards independence, allowing them to be more independent, but doing that in a very kind of tightly controlled and responsible way. Okay, taking advantage of the benefits of GPS and a phone that can dial without handing over the dangers of a smartphone, right? You can also get a dumb phone. Those things still exist, if you didn't know that. Or, of course, put severe restrictions on phones and be monitoring that very closely. Okay, but the point is, of course, the vision, the restraints, and that slow, gradual road towards independence. That's what I'm suggesting this weekend. Okay, let's end with this, with about 5 or 6 minutes that we have left. It's kind of the other side of this, which is that much of what's happening to kids, what people are identifying in kids of a certain age that have, are using these devices very heavily, a lot of screen time, a lot of social media. Much of what's happening is not just what's happening to them when they're on the device or looking at the screen. We've talked a lot about that this weekend. Okay? But much of what's happening is not what's happening with their time on the screen, but it's what they're not doing because they're on the screen, if you understand what I mean by that. Great book that I recommend for lots of reasons, and this is only kind of one piece of it, but there's a book called The Coddling of the American Mind, How Good Intentions and Bad Ideas Are Setting Up a Generation for Failure. And it talks towards the end, it uses the research of Jean Twenge, who we mentioned her book, iGeneration, right? But one whole chapter is devoted to the idea of free play, that there's a severe decline in free play. Kids just going out and as kids without adult instruction and leading, but just playing together, right? Remember, doing that, and I know kids still do that to some degree, okay? Making up games, okay? Figuring it out, exploring, okay? Getting dirty, doing all that stuff. And again, you read the book or look up that idea of the decline of free play, read more about it to know exactly what he means. But there's so many things that are learned developmentally in that kind of, environment, okay? Anything from creativity and taking risks and building confidence. What you really should do, look up the YouTube video on No Rules Recess. It's this crazy principal in Australia that lets the whole school go out and just play in a junkyard, basically, with no rules for recess. Really cool. Not recommending necessarily, disclaimer, right? Legal protection, okay. But there's so much that's learned in terms of confidence, risk-taking, getting along with other people, problem-solving, reconciling, all those kinds of things, that the life of being in front of a screen, a safe environment, just, everything fed to them, not interacting with other people, the kids are missing out on that. But there are a lot of other things, too. In iGen, Jean Twenge talks about things like kids getting their driver's license later, kids getting jobs later in life than they did before. And it's the idea that kids, that as they get up, are not going out and doing the things that maybe were being done by kids or teenagers and learning these important skills because of the time that's spent indoors in front of screens, so on and so forth. Okay? Here's the point that I want to make as we're getting close to the end. Okay? Our homes need to be places where we are doing real life together. Work, play, learning, and rest. One of my favorite proverbs is Proverbs 14:4. This is what it says. Proverbs 14:4, where there are no oxen, the manger is clean, but abundant crops come by the strength of an ox. You can say it this way, modern parlance here. You want to know the easiest way to have the cleanest kitchen around? Always eat out. The kitchen will never be dirty, okay? But we understand that there are benefits and different aspects of benefits to eating in, right? For health reasons, for financial reasons, for other reasons. But when you eat in, which is the better thing to do, guess what? Your kitchen gets messy and you got to clean it up. Where there are no ox in the manger is clean, but if you want an abundant garden, you want abundant crops, you're going to have an ox and you're going to have to deal with messiness. The reality is, as you know, that homes that have a ton of tech and media are really easy, in a sense, full of ease and convenience. The kids are each on their iPad or their phone with their headphones, not bothering each other. They're playing their video games. They're content. Everyone's got their own screen, no fighting, no arguing. You order dinner through Uber Eats. It shows up at your house. There's no cooking or cleanup to do. Friends don't come over. If they do come over, they're on their screens too. Easy, right? Calm, peaceful, no trouble, right? On the other hand, doing the fruitful things together as a family is often messy and difficult and frustrating, okay? I am the youngest of 4 boys. I know that there is no greater opportunity and setup for fighting and verbal altercations than getting out a board game to play together as a family. Talk about messy, right? Or, giving kids chores to do to clean up the house. Well, they're going to complain and fall on the floor, and when they finally do their chore, it's not going to be done very well. I'll probably have to go back in when they go to bed and clean the bathroom myself, right? Trips, vacations, family camping. I mean, come on, loading up the stuff, getting everybody there, the complaining, the car, it's raining when you're trying to set up the tent. It's all family devotionals, Bible reading. I mean, come on, wrangling the kids, and again, they're complaining, they're hesitant, there's not a good time for it. Cooking a meal together from scratch, forget it. Letting the kid into the flour, no way. No. But you know as well as I do that the second way, the messy way, that's the way of life that provides the lasting value. Fruitfulness, good memories, bonding, character building that our kids need. Again, our homes need to be places where we work and play and learn and rest together. And it may be harder, it may be messier, it will be harder and messier. And there will be resistance, I can guarantee you that. If you're going to have to make some changes or you want to make some changes, there's going to be pushback. If your kids are older, if the changes are more drastic, there'll be even more resistance. But I urge you not to let that shake your resolve and to work together again as a church family to figure this out, because our homes should be havens from the shallow and distracted and selfish world, not just a continuation of that within the walls of our home. We want homes that are fruitful gardens where real life is lived and shared together. Again, one more time, thank you so much for offering your attention and your encouragement to us this weekend. We have really enjoyed it and hope that we've been helpful to you. And there's the bell.